Here we go. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Don't Panic Project. We provide conversations to help empower, inspire, and educate people suffering from stress, anxiety, and depression. Today, I'm speaking with Andy Weir. Andy is the author of the best-selling science fiction novel, The Martian, which was turned into a major Hollywood blockbuster motion picture. Andy describes himself as a lifelong space nerd and a devoted hobbyist of subjects such as relativistic physics, orbital mechanics, and the history of manned spaceflight. He also mixes a mean cocktail. He lives in California, and Andy's next book, Artemis, is available now. So welcome, Andy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I know you've had a lot of success recently with your movie, The Martian, and you have a new book out, Artemis. So I think something that probably a lot of people may not know about you is that you've struggled with some anxiety for a large part of your life. So
Yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about that?
sure. It's like I never wasn't anxious, I guess. It's like how I'm wired kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And well, probably when I was a little kid, I wasn't so bad. But as I got older, as I got to be 18, 19, somewhere around there, it started to really kick in. And also in my early 20s, I had a prolonged bout of depression that lasted for literally years. And I'm not sure what that was about. But then other than that, it was pretty bad. I mean, it was like sleeping 15 hours a day, not able to keep a job, kind of just the deep depression that people have. Nothing, to be clear, I never had thoughts of suicide or anything like that. But I mean, I was really depressed and non-functional. And that lasted for about 2 years. And then I kind of came out of that very slowly. But before, during, and after it, I've always had my major problem has been anxiety, and it's been severely life limiting. I couldn't get on a plane. I always have feelings of doom, like that just things are going to happen, and also I came to feel like probability itself was conspiring against me, like that the laws of probability have some sort of like flaw where I'm involved. And I know that's irrational, especially for somebody who's as scientifically minded as I am, but it just got in there in my head, and then the confirmation bias got worse and worse. And I never honestly believed it, but at an emotional level, that's what I was feeling, and I could not talk myself out of it with any amount of reason. Because anxiety is not a logical position. It's not like, oh, I've thought all these things through and I've decided to really worry about this. It's a thing that's just, it's who you are. And I know I'm rambling on a bit, but
No, it's fun.
And as my life proceeded, my life has been a collection of extremely improbable and unlikely events. Just like the weirdest stuff has happened to me. That's just, if I were to write myself as a fictional character, it would not be believable. Like the things that have happened to me in my life. It's like, oh, I sat down to write a book one day. Oh, it became, a national bestseller, a worldwide global phenomenon, became a movie and all that stuff like that. Now you're a professional. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? That doesn't happen. So when people, so one of the many ways in which my anxiety manifests itself is a fear of flying. And I am a scientifically minded person. I know that flying is very safe. I know that I'm more likely to die on the ride to the airport than I am to die in the flight. But I'm still really afraid of it. And when people come and say, like, dude, Andy, the odds of dying in an air crash are astronomically low. And I'm like, so are the odds of everything that's happened in my life.
That's a great counter argument.
I am a nexus of like weird sine waves of probability that all combine and hit right where I am. I've had both phenomenally good luck and phenomenally bad luck in my life. And I just feel like the amplitude for me is higher than it is for other people. Now,
So
Sorry, and I know that that's all confirmation bias and stuff, but still, for almost my entire life, up until a few years ago, when I finally started getting treatment, and I suppose we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Definitely.
Um, up that's how that was my worldview, and it was not pleasant.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry that you've gone through this. I'm happy that you
Um,
made it
I,
through.
I assume everybody you talk to on this has similar stories of either anxiety or depression. So we're all in that same club.
Yeah, we're trying to help people work through it and recognize that they're not alone and hear a lot of
Yes, that's the
support.
most important thing. That's why I was more than happy to come on your show. I felt so alone for so long with this problem. I just felt like, well, I'm a broken human being. Some people can't walk. Some people are blind. I am this, and there's nothing I can do about it. But that's not true. And
Right.
so anybody else who's feeling that way needs to know there are things you can do about it. It's it's not you're not a flawed human being. You're a person with a medical condition that can be, if not completely cured, ameliorated.
Yeah, definitely. There are solutions, and that's what we aim to investigate here on the Don't Panic Project. So let me ask you, if we could take a few steps back even, and could you maybe tell us a little bit about how you grew up? And
Yeah, I mean, so let's see. I was born and raised in California, Northern California, where I still live today. Although I've lived in lots of other places around the country in the intervening time. My parents divorced when I was 8. And I lived with my mother from age 8 till 14, and then lived with my father from 14 to 18. And then I left home and struck out on my own, went to college, all that stuff. Um, I don't know how much of my life do you want? Did you want my
well,
childhood or?
yeah, well, yeah, maybe get into a little bit of your childhood. We're
Okay.
trying to
Well,
help people and maybe
yeah.
relate to other people.
Well, I had fairly, I was not a happy child. I feel like I was fairly happy up until my parents got divorced. And around then, I started to get miserable. There were large life changes. And of course, that in any kid, it's tumultuous to have your parents get divorced. Although mine got divorced in as pleasant a way as possible. There wasn't a lot of, there wasn't legal battles or anything like that. There was just like, they sat me down one day and said, like, look, your mom and I are, we're getting a divorce. This is no reflection on you. We still love you. Everything's going to be fine. So it was as pleasant a divorce process from my point of view. I later learned it was horrible for them, but they did a good job hiding it from me.
Right.
And like my mom said, for instance, so this was in like the late 70s, or actually 1980, like 1980. And when they got divorced, my mom, this was at a time when alimony was a given. Like if you got divorced, you were going to be, if you're the man, you're going to be paying alimony to the woman. That's how it was. Nowadays, women earn their own way, and so you don't get as much of that. But
Yeah.
back then, it was not the case. And my mom said, all right, I'll make you a deal with my dad. My mom was, a housewife. She had no like job skills or anything like that. And she's like, all right, if you pay for me to get a 2-year engineering degree, if you put me through college to get a degree, then I will not ask for any alimony.
Smart woman.
Yep. And so that's what happened. Dad paid for, like, he moved out, but he paid for all of our expenses and everything like that for 2 years, including mom's college stuff, and so that she could get a degree. And then he did pay child support, but no alimony, and mom had a career from then on. So, I mean, the reason I'm telling you all this is so that you understand that this was as pleasant a divorce as a kid could have. They weren't using me as a weapon against each other. They had some sort of unspoken agreement to keep the acrimony from me, and so. But despite that, it's still a huge change in a kid's life.
Right.
My dad wasn't there every day anymore. Mom and I moved to another city. It was nearby, but moved to another city, and so it was just me and mom. And I went from having full-time parents around, like having a full-time stay-at-home mom, to being a latchkey kid, which in the 80s was a thing people cared about. Nowadays, they really don't. But And I was moved into a new environment where I had no friends.
Yeah, very, very difficult adjustments for kids. No doubt.
Yeah. And then, so mom moved around a lot for her job. She would end up like getting new jobs in the engineering world. You change jobs frequently, and so we would move around a lot. So I was never ever really able to develop social groups. I would move around. You know, as soon as I started to make friends, well, we'd move, and then I had to start all over again. And right around the time I started going through puberty, I became, you know, an asshole teenager. I'm sorry. How do you feel about swearing on your show?
That's fun.
Okay.
Yeah, hey,
I became a
keep it
typical
real.
asshole. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I was a pretty good kid, but even the best teenagers are horrible, right? And so mom and I started really butting heads a lot. And also, she could have handled things better. She had her problems. I don't want to talk shit about my mom here, but just suffice it to say that our relationship deteriorated quite a lot to the point that she felt like she couldn't handle me anymore. And so she talked to dad, and they agreed that I would move in with him. And then I moved in with my father and stepmother. And the next 4 years of my life, so this is age 14 to 18, were pretty much the worst of my life. We were an extraordinarily dysfunctional family. We didn't work on any level. We were not even really a family. I was kind of like an unwanted house guest, and it put a strain on their marriage. Like nobody, it was miserable.
Wow.
My stepmother and I really did not get along. And I basically, the way I ended up dealing with it was I spent as much time away from the house as possible. I would go hang out with my friends until I knew my parents had gone to bed, and then I'd come home and that sort of thing. I mean, we were not a family unit at all. They would take vacations without me. Like
Wow.
they'd say, "Oh, this year we're going to Greece. Here's some money for groceries and stuff." But I mean, like,
And how old were you at that point? It was
age 14 to 18.
wow. That's amazing. That hurts just to hear you tell me that story. You know,
It was not good. But I mean, we've all got our shit, and I want to
yeah,
make
no
it clear
doubt.
that's like this is all like emotionally painful stuff, but they always took care of me. They always made sure I was fed. They never hit me. I was never beaten or abused in any
Right,
way.
right,
The only punishments I ever received were basically being grounded, you know. So it was not abusive in any way. It's
right.
just we weren't really a family.
It sounds like there's a lack of emotional intelligence, you know, from your father and one level up, you know, obviously, but
I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I would just say that Dad was doing the best he could in a very, very difficult situation where his wife and his son were at each other's throats.
gotcha.
And it's like, what do you do? Like,
Right.
how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
And it's like these are two people, neither of whom are, yeah, normally in your life, if you've got, let's say you've got two friends, you know, and they're friends. They're not relatives. They're not lovers. They're just friends of yours. They're buddies. You beer
Right.
buddies. You hang out with, and they hate each other. Let's say they completely despise each other. Well, you can hang out with one at a time, or if necessary, you can cut one of them out of your life and choose the other. You can do that. You can't do that with your wife and your son,
Right. Right. Right.
and you can't not live together. So it's just like poor dad was in a situation where he's like, there was nothing he could do.
Right.
And my stepmother was in a situation where she had just married this guy, and then all of a sudden she has this teenage boy who, and by the way, I was very immature. I was not, 14-year-olds are immature, but I was immature for a 14-year-old. My mom had not, my mom didn't really raise me. My mom was very hands off, which I loved at the time, but it meant that I was pretty much feral. Like I didn't bathe, stuff like that. And so my dad and stepmom had to be the ones who enforced all these rules. Look, you have to act like a normal human. That made them the bad guys. And I really came to dislike my stepmom. My stepmom was young and immature and had just married a guy and didn't really want an obnoxious 14-year-old in her house. It was a mess.
Yeah. No, I get it. I mean,
We'll get along now.
that's great. I mean, I was going to ask if you've reconciled and, things are somewhat better.
Yeah, and we've talked all this stuff through in the intervening years. I mean, I'm 45 now. It's been a long time.
Right.
They've changed. I've changed. Everybody's changed. But yeah, we all agree those were the worst years of our lives. Like,
Yeah, no, sounds.
and I later found out that my dad and stepmother, it was such a stressful environment for them. They came close to divorce.
Well, so do you think, so obviously it sounds like a lot of your childhood events created some of this anxiety that you ended up having.
Possibly, although I was always, I don't know. I honestly don't know how much of it is nature and how much is nurture.
Right.
I mean, because I assume at some point we're gonna talk about treatment.
Yes, absolutely.
And so a little teaser on the treatment discussion is I now take antidepressants, which I haven't had problems with depression in a very long time, but I guess depression and anxiety are two sides of the same coin. And so whatever chemical malfeasance is going on to cause anxiety can also be treated with antidepressants. And that has dramatically improved my life. So from this, I conclude that there's more than just a psychological component to this. There is
physical, biological.
There is something. There's an imbalance in there that the antidepressants really helped, and also just for what it's worth, depression and anxiety run in my family. Like lots of, there's a lot of it in my family, especially on my mom's side.
So that makes perfect sense. So
yeah.
Hey, so just actually, I guess we'll go off track for a minute. So your mom having the engineering degree and you being a latchkey kid when you were younger. So this is obviously, I would say, well, maybe not obviously, but you became a real, I think in your own words, a real like science nerd when you were younger. And
even before my parents got divorced. I mean.
Oh, it even stems back from before then.
I mean, yeah. It just as long as I can remember.
I mean, you worked as a computer programmer at the Sandia National Labs from the time you were 15 years old, which is amazing. And we're talking also back in, that's got to be the 80s, right? The early 80s.
Yep, mid 80s. Yeah.
Before computer programming was the buzzword.
It was just starting to take off. I was fortunate. This is one of those, lines of probability. Right. I happened to be born and raised in Silicon Valley. It was beginning and found myself in what has got to be like what was at the time the most like successful industry to be in. Like I was a software engineer right through the tech boom. Like,
wow. Yeah.
What more could you ask for in terms of rolling the dice? And I was born into it. I mean, I lived in Silicon Valley before it mattered, before Silicon Valley had anything to do with computers. I was born there.
Right. So, right in your sweet spot, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, you can argue, well, if I was born in Nebraska, maybe I wouldn't have been as immersed in the culture that had an interest in computers and wouldn't have gone into it. I don't know, but one way or another, I got born into, by global standards, I'm incredibly lucky. I got born into like a middle-class American household. I am the majority ethnicity and the empowered gender, and I'm, so. I don't have a lot to bitch about, yet I do.
You know what? That's a lot of the stress and depression of the West is just this whole keeping up with the Joneses thing, and especially now with social media, we're constantly comparing ourselves to our neighbor's car or whatever the case may be. But if you take a step back and really look at what we have compared to so many other people in the world. I mean, so many other people in the world would obviously, give anything to have the lives we have. And sometimes we really, really lose sight of that. I mean, I do quite often, and I have to ground myself and remind myself that
I'm 45 years old and I've never worried about where my next meal's coming from.
Yeah, it's an amazing concept, one that frankly I don't want to say most people in this country, because unfortunately there are a lot of people in poverty in this country, but
Still, most people in this country don't have that problem.
Right.
Some do,
right.
unfortunately,
Right.
but most don't.
Absolutely. So, you know what? I want to actually talk about your short story, The Egg, which I think is an amazing story. And I think there's some interesting things there also. Do you think so? Give us a little synopsis of the Egg, if you could. Just
with full-on spoilers.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a 1,000-word short story.
Right,
Anybody who's like listening to this,
that's why,
watching this, if you don't want spoilers, pause now and then go spend 5 minutes reading.
And it'll
The Egg.
still be worth reading with the spoilers. So
yeah.
All right.
Okay. So basically, The Egg is a story of a guy who dies. And it's told in the first person. Well, it's actually told in the second person, which I had fun with. But anyway, it's a guy dies and meets God, and God and him are talking. And God's like, guy's like, wait, I'm dead, and God's like, yep, you died, but that's okay, everybody dies. And so the guy who is just referred to as you, the story is told first person, and God is the narrator. So it starts off with, you were on your way home when you died. That's the first line. And he talks to you, the character. It's funny. I've seen all sorts of literary analysis of The Egg, and I never thought of it before. But the character's name, people all agree, the character's name is you. And there's you and God. Yeah. So anyway, which is very appropriate. But anyway, he's talking, and God said, and he says, "Hey, God, so what happens now? Heaven, hell, what happens?" And God says, neither. You're going to get reincarnated, and this time you're going to be a Chinese peasant girl in like 540 A.D. And the guy's like, "Wait, you're sending me back in time?" And God says, "Well, yeah, sure. I mean, time is a concept that it exists for you, but for me, it's a lot different." And he's like, "Well, wait, if I'm going back in time and being reincarnated, I may have interacted with myself." And God's like, "Sure, happens all the time." And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know it's happening. And he's like, "Well, what's the point then? What's the point of reincarnation? Everything I did is just erased when I get into a baby and I become a new baby." And God's like, "Not so. Your soul is huge and immense and vast. And as you experience each new life, you gather all the knowledge that it has. You don't remember it right now because you've been crammed up in a human body for a long time, but each life is like putting your finger into a glass of water to find out if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you pull it out, you have all the experiences it had." And then he's like, "All right, so what's the meaning of life then?" And God's like, "Oh man, everybody asks that." And he's like, he's like, "Okay, the meaning of life is I created this whole universe for you to mature." And he's like, "You mean mankind?" God's like, "No, I mean you. You specifically. I want you to mature." And the guy's like, "You made this whole universe for me? What about everyone else?" And God says, "There is no one else. It's just you. You're every human being who has ever lived throughout all time. You just keep going back in time and living lives in an order that I see fit. And that's what's happening. And once you've lived every human life ever, then you will have lived enough to be born into my world, because this is what you are. You're my offspring. You're my child. I'm your parent." And the guy says, "Wait, I'm a god?" He's like, "No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're growing. Once you're born, once you have trillions of human lives, or billions and billions, hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of human lives of experience, then you will have matured enough to be an infant in my world." And so the entire universe is an egg.
Right.
Hence the title.
I think it's brilliant. I really.
Thank you.
Definitely, people have to check it out. But let me ask you. So, where do you think the impetus, for that story came from? I mean,
I get asked that a lot.
Anxiety, and let me just go for a second here. You have this fear of flying, which is basically a fear of death on some levels. So here you've written the story about you dying and being reincarnated. So do you think some of this comes from, the
anxiety,
the anxious?
It's possible. It's a comforting afterlife concept, right? The idea that you're not missing out on anything. Right. You're literally not missing out on anything. You're not going to miss anything. Anybody you've ever envied, you're like, well, you get to be that guy eventually, or maybe you already were. If you feel like you're ugly, well, you're like, doesn't matter, I'm going to be pretty later. If you're disabled in some way, you're like, well, I won't be next time. And and so it's a very comforting ideology, and it makes you feel like, oh, and shit. No, it's like, so I'm going to be every single human being, and then I'm going to move on to the next stage, which is something I can't even comprehend, but is even more awesome.
I like that, actually. I don't necessarily think I've thought of it like that. And given your childhood also, and I mean, that's an interesting, it's comforting, isn't it?
Right. Now, just to be clear, I always have to say this disclaimer: I don't believe in this. I don't believe that this is true. I am not starting a religion here.
Right.
It's just a story I wrote.
And that was going to be another question, because I absolutely you describe yourself as an agnostic. So, listen, we can all write stories. That you were able to come up with this as somebody that's as not agnostic. I don't know. Maybe I'm digging a little too deep.
Well, what it comes down to is really it's less exciting and less philosophical than you may think. It's like, I like coming up with internally consistent systems. I like coming up with, in my books, I try to come up with, like, so for instance, in Artemis, my latest one, I started by trying to come up with the economy. And then once I had the economy of the city, it takes place in a city on the moon. Once I had the economy of the city, then I could start thinking about what the construction of the city is like. And I wanted everything to make internal consistent sense. Everything has to work. That's why I like using real physics and real science in my stories, is because everything is perfectly internally consistent. The physical world is extremely good at remaining internally consistent.
Right.
And so with the egg, what I wanted to do was, I was like, I want an afterlife that is fair, right? I want an afterlife that is absolutely fair. And and most real religions, it's highly questionable whether or not you would consider that fair. It's like a set of morals that you may or may not believe in are enforced upon you by an external entity, and then you're judged at the end by your ability to adhere to them, whether or not you believed that they were true. And so that's doesn't seem fair. And it also doesn't seem fair that this guy gets to be, a multi-billionaire his whole life, and then he dies, and this other guy, dies of childhood, of juvenile, what do you call it, like anemia or something like that, sickle cell anemia by age 9, and spends his entire life suffering. It's like, that's not fair, right? So I wanted to come up with an afterlife where it is indisputably fair.
Gotcha.
And so that's what I came up with, is that, in the reality of the egg, it's fair. Like every time, every murder that's committed was you doing that to yourself. Every time you hurt somebody, you were just smacking yourself around. Every time you helped somebody, you were helping yourself. Every time you brought joy, you made yourself happy. It is internally consistent and pretty elegant. And so I like coming up with internally consistent scenarios.
Gotcha. Just one more. Did you ever read the book "Many Lives, Many Masters" by Brian Weiss? By any chance?
I haven't. I haven't read that.
It's, you might find it interesting. It's going along with the whole egg concept. It's a book. It's written by Brian Weiss, who's a classically trained psychiatrist, at Columbia, and he's has this patient come in for therapy, and it turns into this whole thing where she actually starts to channel these previous lives. And again, this is a classically trained scientist who didn't necessarily believe in reincarnation or anything like that. But as he digs deeper into his patient, he starts to believe in all these things that.
Is this the character in the book or the actual author?
This is real. This is a true story. Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters. You should check it out. I kept thinking about that when I was reading The Egg, and I think that's why I actually started to want to kind of ask you about The Egg. It was a book that kind of had an impact on me, and then reading.
I'm glad it had a positive impact.
Yeah. No. So then reading The Egg, I was like, I wonder if there's some connection here. If you had read that and so forth. So just
no, I haven't. Yeah, I've had a lot of people email me saying like, "Hey, man, I think you're right. I think that's how it is." I'm like, "Well, good for you. I don't."
Right.
You know,
I have no idea.
like,
Many launch, many masters
any
of my life.
correlation any
Yeah, it's
correlation
a
with
story
reality
I
is
really enjoyed. So I was wondering if there was some correlation, and then I was thinking about your anxiety and the fear of death, would possibly fear of flying, if there was something there. Try to find some correlation. In any event, let's get back to your anxiety disorder.
okay.
So you stated you specifically have a fear of flying.
That's just I mean, I do, and that's just one part of it, though.
So what are the other parts?
Everything was more stressful for me than it would be for a normal person. Like just like I would overplan. So what one thing I've heard said, and I don't know how accepted this is, but some people say that anxiety is just a form of OCD, but it's about how someone with OCD like has to have the environment clean or has to have an exact multiple of 15 watts, on every light bulb or something, right?
Right.
So OCD comes in various ways where you have this compulsive need to control something. Well, anxiety, under this theory, is a compulsive need to control the future.
Right.
So anxiety that's why you end up with like massive over planning, like to a ridiculous degree, and like practicing mundane conversations you're going to have later in the day, and just every aspect of life is so much more difficult than it would be for a normal person, and so much more stressful. So just driving was stressful for me, and like I'll be heading toward a restaurant or something like that, and I'm like, what if I can't find parking? What if the parking lot's full? Okay, what about curbside parking? I've never liked luck. I hate luck. I hate leaving anything to chance because I feel like chance is just waiting around the corner to fuck me. Like it's just always been the case in the past. That's how I feel. Like if anything can possibly, no matter how unlikely the scenario, there's always some bullshit that happens. I feel like I'm always the one that the airline loses their luggage, or I'm the one who, like, when 50 people are at this fast food restaurant, I'm the one whose order that slips through the cracks and never gets made. And you know what I mean? It's like, that's how I feel.
Right.
And it's all based on confirmation bias. I suspect I'm no more prone to that than anyone else gets. But, and so it's like that. It's like looking around the corner. It's like feeling like the universe is out to get you. And
I understand, and I can relate, having gone through a 2-year period of severe anxiety, which was kind of event-based. I went through a job loss while my wife was pregnant with our first child, and so to your point, I couldn't stop.
Stressful.
Right. I couldn't stop worrying about the future. How am I going to get another job? How am I going to pay the bills? And then
sounds like, I mean, there's like anxiety is irrational stress, whereas worrying about caring for your newborn is rational.
Well, to an extent. So when it completely consumes you to the point where you are completely dysfunctional. So, my definition of stress is worrying about the future and ruminating about the past and not being able to be present. We hear this term being present all the time, and you're like, what does this mean? And that's what it means. So, when this happened to me, I just couldn't stop worrying about the future. And I was pissed off about the past. Why did I get laid off? Why not the other guy? My boss was a jerk, So I had all that going on. And, I made it all about me. And it really was not about me. It was an economic crash, and 50% of the company I was at basically got laid off. But, I made it about me. I walled myself in. I just I didn't talk to people. And, it sounds, you went through a little bit you went through a little of that also, you were saying.
Yeah.
And that's what we do to ourselves. And that really makes it worse when we just don't talk to people. And what it is, though, when you talk to people, you're bringing awareness to your feelings and your thoughts. And
I didn't really have
that. Yeah. Then
I also
through it. So sorry.
As I went through these issues, which, like I said, started in my 20s and just kind of persisted up until I got proper treatment, I didn't really have a supportive peer group. So I had friends, but I had guy friends. It's like, oh, we'll hang out, we'll watch a game together, we'll do this stuff. I mean, you don't talk about your feelings with them.
Right, absolutely. Western men, we're all strong. We're men. Everything's fine. Everything's
men. Well, no, it's more than that too. When I was upset or whatever, and I'd want to talk about something, my friends would be like, "Dude, quit bitching," like, So your friends, like, they don't want to hear it. So anytime I did try to open up to anybody, they'd basically tell me to shut up. So I ended up with walls that I feel like I didn't really build. Like, it's like I feel like my social group kind of walled me off, and that started at an early age because, like, going back to like my upbringing with my parents, I felt like my mom didn't love me. I mean, it took me a long time to realize that my mom sent me to my dad's because she was worried about me. She was worried that she wasn't able to handle me and was worried about my well-being. But when you're a kid, you don't understand that.
Right.
All I thought was my mom didn't want me. And then I go to dad's and I'm like, he didn't want me either. And so I'm like, I am alone. And
they weren't really available for you to talk to either, from what you had said earlier. So,
well, we were fairly acrimonious. I mean, and then my friends didn't want to hear me bitch about life. I mean, and to be fair, that's when you're a 25-year-old guy, you don't have the conversations like that with guys. You don't.
Right. And that's the thing is, who wants to hear other people bitching? Because I have enough of my own shit going on. So it's dichotomy, no doubt.
Yeah. So I grew up in an environment where any sort of expression of anxiety or grief was met with, quit feeling sorry for yourself.
Right.
And that, I just want to say to your viewers, is the hardest thing to get past. It is we have a concept in our society of like self-pity is bad. Okay, well, yeah, it is if you just wallow in it and do nothing about it. But people are very, very quick to call it self-pity when you are expressing a legitimate problem. And so don't write everything off as just being self-pity. Like, someone's like, you know what, if somebody's dad died yesterday and he's like, I'm sad because my dad died, you wouldn't say like, oh, quit feeling sorry for yourself. No, there's the concept of there is a legitimate amount of sadness that you are allowed to have, and it's okay to have it. And that there's a legitimate amount of anxiety or worry or concern or grievance that you're allowed to have. And it can't just be written off as self-pity.
Right. No doubt. Very, very important. What was I going to say? So what ultimately became your treatment? What helped you the most?
Well, first I'll tell you what ultimately made me seek treatment was that I just realized I wasn't living my life at all. My whole life was just a series of, basically what really shook up my life was The Martian. Like, I was a computer programmer, I worked in an office, I was good at my job, and I got a certain amount of satisfaction from that. I was fairly happy from, like, I liked my coworkers, I liked my bosses, I liked the company I worked for, I made good money, I had a home, I had cats, I had a life for myself, I had friends, and so on. And then The Martian came, and it was like this tactical nuclear weapon that changed every aspect of my life. Now all of a sudden I'm like in the public limelight. I have to travel all the time. I'm doing all this stuff, and no one's going to feel sorry for me on this, right? So I understand that this is like a serious first world problem, but my entire life changed, and with that change came massive anxiety. The one thing, weirdly, paradoxically, is I don't have any problem with public speaking. None whatsoever. It's the most common fear people have.
Absolutely.
People fear public speaking more than they fear death, which means they would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
I've had a public speaking coach on this show for precisely that reason, because public speaking is, people's number one fear.
So for me, I've never had a problem with it. So that's weird. It's like I saved up all of my strength points and ended up with that one thing, but I'm fine on public speaking. But the travel and the uncertainty on what's going to happen here, what's going to happen there, and now I have to write another book and all, and will the movie get made? And oh my God, are there production delays? Or will this happen? How's the book selling? What about the paperback, and so on? Just, I was so stressed out. I mean, I was just a bundle of nerves, and I was miserable. And I'm like, fuck it, I need to get some help. And what really kind of made me do it was I got offered an opportunity to go to NASA to tour Johnson Space Center. And I was like, all right, I need to do this, but I live in California and I can't fly there. I need to fly there. So I went and talked to my doctor and said, like, look, I want happy pills to just knock me on my ass and make me a non-entity so that I can fly to Houston.
Make me a piece of luggage.
Yeah, basically make me luggage. And I'm like, okay. So, and my doctor's like, well, sounds like you need some more than just that. Maybe you should talk to a psychiatrist. And so this is my GP. She recommended me to a psychiatrist who in turn said, like, let's do some analysis. So basically they kind of forced me into it by saying, like, all right, we can get you on that flight, but also you have other problems that you should be addressing. And so it was, I guess it comes down to good doctors kind of making me do it. Ultimately, they put me on sertraline, which is Zoloft, for the long-term anxiety. And that really helped a lot. And it's a weird effect in that, I don't know if you take anything, but it's, first off, it had no side effects and seemingly no effects at all. Like when I was taking it, it was like, these could be sugar pills for all I know. They're not doing anything. I don't have any negative or positive effects at all, but I'm taking them on the schedule that they said. But then it was just really slowly, I would notice every now and then something didn't bother me as much as it seemed like it should have. One time I'd been on it for several months, and I was driving to IKEA near my house. And the last time I had gone to IKEA, it had been like a couple of years earlier. And I remembered the last time I drove there, I was extremely stressed out about how the parking lot was structured. Like, you have to get off this exit, then you have to turn, then you have to turn, then you have to get into the parking lot. And just at every stage, there's an opportunity to fuck up. And it's incredibly stressful to me. And if you screw up, you're going to be out on the city streets, and you're going to have to find your way back in. And I get lost easily. And I remember being so stressed out about that. And then the more recent time, the time after the meds, I've been taking the meds for a few months, I'm driving there, and I'm like, I started to tense up a little bit, like in preparation, like if someone's about to hit you and you're like, like that. And then it just wasn't a big deal. I was just like, oh, okay, I just go here, and if I miss it, then I just do a U-turn there, and it's not that big a deal. And so it's like that. You don't notice a change until you find yourself in a situation that used to stress you out a lot, and now it doesn't.
Right. So you're able to get on a plane, obviously, now and fly. I know you just came back from London. So
yeah, but I still need the pills to fly. I still can't handle that. Right. And what's funny is you said it's an aspect of a fear of death. I really don't think that's the case. My greatest fear is helplessness. So my greatest fear is being in a plane that is going to crash, and I know that I'm going to die, and there's nothing I can do about it. So dying unexpectedly isn't a big fear of mine. So like a lot of people tense up on takeoff and landing on the plane. I'm totally calm for that. Huh. What's stressful for me is when we're way up in the air, not because of a fear of heights, but because if something goes wrong that's going to kill me, it's going to take a long time for me to get to the ground and die already. But if we die on landing, I'm not going to know what hit me. So I'm not afraid. So it's the loss of control and the feeling of helplessness and disempowerment that comes with just sitting on a plane and going like, well, something goes wrong, I'm gonna die.
So you actually
and I still take pills. I take Valium to fly.
Okay. So yeah. You really didn't seek treatment till The Martian came out, really?
Not quite true. I didn't get effective treatment until The Martian came out, until I ended up in that situation. So I had been seeking...
explored other things previously.
ever since I was in my 20s, I had been seeking treatment. I've been going to therapists and stuff like that.
Okay.
But at the time, when I was in my 20s, it was the 1990s, and at the time there was a large uptick in understanding of depression. Like people were really starting to pay attention to depression and medications for depression and stuff like that. But there wasn't much about anxiety. So when I would go to therapy, the general treatment plan was suck it up, you pussy. I mean, that's pretty much it. And it would always be like, it would always be the same thing. It'd be like, oh, well, we're going to teach you some breathing exercises to help calm you down. And we're going to teach you some kind of meditation techniques and stuff like that. And to me, that was like throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. It's like, okay, these are like mildly effective, but no.
Right. Okay. So that didn't work. Did you ever work with a real meditation teacher, or just?
No, I mean, I never did. I mean, I took courses and stuff like that where they taught us meditative techniques, but it wasn't like dedicated to that. It was a general anxiety amelioration
Right.
kind of thing.
Because I when I was going through my issues, I tried a lot of things, and therapy and antidepressants and drinking heavily.
Self-medicating, that's a good one. Yeah.
So none of that stuff really helped, obviously, for me. And actually, mindfulness meditation was actually what got me out of.
If you found the thing that works,
yeah, no,
there's a saying in exercise, which is funny because I never go to a gym ever. I'm the laziest person you'll ever meet. But there is a saying in gyms which is the best machine at the gym is the one you'll get on.
Yeah,
right.
No
so
doubt. Listen, this is all about finding, talking about different solutions and finding things that work for different people, and So now I teach mindfulness. So I was gonna, offer to guide you through a little meditation if you wanted to try it, but it sounds like you've tried it already. But
I've tried some meditation, but
would you be game for it? What do you say?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. So we'll just do a short one.
All right.
I'll explain to you the gist of how it works. So,
okay.
Listen, a lot of us breathe incorrectly. We breathe short into our chest, and that actually is a fight or flight method of breathing, and it can actually create more anxiety. It feels like you can't get enough air. So what you want to really do is cultivate the skill of breathing into your diaphragm. All right. So just for a second, maybe sit with one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And what should really happen is...
I'm doing it. It's below camera, but I'm doing it.
Yeah, it's okay. So the hand on your belly should actually move in and out. The hand on your chest should stay relatively still. So, it takes some practice. And it takes a little practice. And it can feel really relaxing. So it's something that takes some work to really cultivate. And there you go. So here's the idea. When you do a little meditation, we want to cultivate the breath as our anchor, and the proper breath into the diaphragm. Now, the idea is that we're human. And here's a little science behind this. 90 to 95% of our thoughts actually occur on the subconscious level. So while you're driving to IKEA, you start ruminating or worrying about the parking or the parking lot or whatever it is. And if I can't find parking, and a lot of that's going on through your mind, and it's going on nonstop. And you might not realize that you're just having these crazy thoughts. Perhaps a student is worried about a test, and what if I fail the test? What if I, for me, again, what if I can't find another job, and I can't, how am I going to take care of my kids, and so forth, from my story earlier. So the idea is that when we're doing this meditation, once you recognize that you're having a thought, label the thought, and you could just say thinking or worrying about the test, whatever it is, and then you bring your attention back to your anchor. So you're moving your thoughts out of the subconscious into, a level of awareness. And when you do that, then you can deal with those worries and ruminations and work through them a lot easier. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, you identify what's on your mind
Right, because
at a conscious level.
so much of this is occurring on the subconscious level, and we have 50 to 80,000 thoughts a day. And the really scary part of that is that 80% of them are negative and recurring. So, when we really rev ourselves up, that percentage goes way up, and we can't. It just turns into this vicious circle that we can't.
Yeah.
And so, how do we end that? We bring awareness to those thoughts by labeling it, and it's a really powerful technique. So I'll just guide you through this little meditation. The whole point is that when you recognize, the first step in meditation is recognizing that you're having these thoughts. So it's just awareness of your thoughts, and then bringing your awareness back to your anchor. And all right, so let's give it a shot. So I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes, and we'll start out by just bringing some awareness first to our posture and noting the parts of our body that are making contact, with the floor and the chair and providing some support for us. And it's not imperative to have perfect posture right now, but we just want to note that we're sitting with a sense of intention and intention to practice and be present and nurture ourselves in this way. And the belly rising on the in-breath and falling on the out-breath. And just settling in at our own pace. The belly rising on the in-breath and falling on the out-breath. And if our mind goes to thoughts about tomorrow or yesterday, just label the thought. Know that it's perfectly normal. We're human, that's what we do. You can just say thinking. And perhaps you're feeling a little restless. Just label that, feeling restless. Whatever comes up. And just escorting your attention back to the breath. Perhaps on the next in-breath, attaching the word soften. As your body feels a little more relaxed with every breath. Maybe bringing some awareness to the sensation of the air entering the nasal passage and flowing down the back of the throat. Maybe noting the temperature of that air. The belly rising on the in-breath and falling on the out-breath. And maybe on the next in-breath, attaching the word nourish. And just visualizing your whole body being completely nourished as you breathe properly. And in a moment, I'm going to ring a chime, at which point you can just open your eyes and bring your awareness back to the surroundings of the room. But until then, just try to stick with the breath for a few more moments. All right, so that was about, a 3.5, 4-minute little meditation. That's
there we go.
So how'd you feel doing that?
Well, I'm not very experienced at it, so I had a difficult time keeping my mind focused on the present. I was thinking about I have to mow the lawn before this other meeting today. I tried to just label those and set them aside, but I was getting I've got other stuff to do today, and I was kind of running through that and kept trying to say like, okay,
Yeah.
noted, put it away.
No,
And like, I kind of have to go to the bathroom a little bit. And so I was like, okay, well, note that and put it away. And,
all normal, all normal.
Mhm.
But what happens is as these thoughts come up and you learn to recognize them and label them, then exactly, you can kind of put them away
But I wasn't able to really put them away.
Well,
I was like, I identified them, but it was still
right.
bugging me. It's like, I want to
Sure.
open my eyes and check the clock because I've got,
It takes practice. It takes practice. And
yeah, and so I don't have a lot of practice.
We're running a little long, and I want to let you go also. So, I really do appreciate the time that you've given us and all the insight, and your work is amazing.
Oh, thanks.
So, Andy, your book that just came out is Artemis. Any other projects that you can tell us about?
Well, right now I'm just de-stressing from the Artemis book tour. It was really brutal on me. It was like a lot of travel, a lot of events, and like I said, the public speaking doesn't bother me, but just every other aspect of an event does.
Right.
I love talking to fans. I love meeting them. I like doing autograph lines, but everything else is just like getting from point A to point B, dealing with airport crap, getting to the hotel, dealing with that, waking up at weird hours, dealing with jet lag, having.
That's where the mindfulness really can help out. The breathing while you're online and dealing with all this stuff and just.
I never have a time to breathe.
Yeah, well, that's just it. There's the. You got to find the time. It's
yeah, I guess so.
Can be life changing, but again, I really want to thank you for spending the time here today. And
well, thank you for what you're doing, because I really feel like I wish there had been people like you doing what you do back when I felt so alone with the anxiety. I just felt like I was a broken person, and I knew that there were probably other people like me out there, but I didn't think about that. I didn't meet any of them, or if I did, people, you get good at hiding it. And so I just felt so alone and so helpless. And people really need to know that neither of those things are true. You're definitely not alone, and you can be helped. And you need to do a little bit. You need to go talk to people. You need to, if you get meds, you also need to do therapy. I do therapy every week.
Yeah,
an hour-long therapy session every week. Been doing it for years.
I know you're not alone. That awareness that you are not alone, and that's what this project is really all about: to bring people's stories to the public, so people that are suffering can recognize they're not alone, and there is help, and there's a way out.
Yes.
And
I kind of wish you'd been around and the internet to convey it 20 years ago.
Amen. I'll tell you, same for me. I wish this was going on. So thanks again, and
thank you.
See you soon, and much success with Artemis.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.